With the release of Fallen Banners onto the PTS, we got 2 new dungeons, Exiled, Redoubt, and the other one. I want to make a quick video on my first impressions of the Exiled Redoubt dungeon, as I like the dungeon overall, however I do have some issues with it that I hope get addressed later in the PTS cycle. For this video, I don't really have a script, more just talking points about certain fights and some of the things that are good and some of the things that are bad with this dungeon. Out of the 2 dungeons, Exiled Redoubt is probably the more familiar one, as it's just 3 bosses and 3 secret bosses. Each secret boss gives a buff, and the 3 main bosses all have hard modes. Starting off with the secrets, they're all very easy fights, and overall the buffs are kind of meh except for one. The first boss basically gives you a free revive and can let you die in the trifecta, basically. This buff is incredibly overpowered, and if you're going for just the title, there's no reason to not pick up this buff, as a free death is kind of nice. The second buff is interesting at the very best. It's not very strong, however, it's super funny what it is. I don't want to spoil it here, so just go do the dungeon on PTS or when it comes out live and find the second secret boss. The third buff is pretty interesting. It's insanely strong if you can actually time it properly. However, timing it properly is not the easiest thing to do in the middle of a fight. 25% on paper sounds extremely strong. However, overall, it only has 10 seconds of uptime for however long it's down, and it's kind of hard to time when you actually want it to be on. I want to talk about the main bosses now. The first one, I really only have 2 gripes with it. The first is because my group shares a singular brain cell, we kind of just stumbled our way through the mechanic at first, and it really wasn't explained well to us, but again, we aren't the smartest people in the world, so yeah, that kind of could be our fault. During the main mechanic of the fight, after her phase transitions, she'll put a yellow circle on a player. This player needs to be stacked on. We figured this out incredibly quickly, and the problem became we only had 3 people. When you have 1 person with the AoE, it does around 150,000 damage. If you have 3 people on the AoE, it still does around 150,000 damage. This confused us more than it probably should have. The actual answer to this mechanic is you just have all 4 players stacked. However, we got super confused and ended up just brute forcing the mechanic and clearing that way the first time. On our trifecta run, we figured it out, but it's kind of weird that's not explained well. The other issue I have with this fight deals with the hard mode. The fight really just revolves around dodging spikes coming out of the ground, and on hard mode we expected these spikes to one-shot. They in fact do not. With the way the fight is structured, it's kind of weird that these spikes don't deal that much damage on hard mode or even one shot. It's kind of weird. You can dodge roll most of them. Some of them you can. If you get stuck in those, they will basically kill you. However, it's just weird that the normal spikes don't really do anything. Other than that, though, the boss is really easy and it's a fun fight. It's just a little bit weird that some of the mechanics do what they do. I feel like having the heavy track you a bit better and having the spikes one shot would increase the difficulty of this fight in a fair way. But on to the second boss. The second boss I have by far the most issues with, as it is kind of just a copy and paste of Chimera with a couple of extra mechanics added on top. Overall, the fight is super simple if you have enough damage. If you don't, it can become an issue as you'll slowly lose more and more space in the arena, but if you can put out enough damage to not make it matter, this fight is incredibly easy. The major issue I have with this fight is he doesn't have enough health to warrant the space reducing mechanics, and also his main spectacle mechanic does basically nothing. Along with all of this, he has what's supposed to be high pressure dot on one player. If that player dies, it takes everyone around them with them. However, it doesn't do enough damage to threaten this one player if you're playing with a healer. Starting off with the space reducing mechanic, if you have enough damage, this mechanic does nothing. You can literally just kite him around the arena, and by the time you make it maybe a fourth of the way around the arena, he'll probably be dead. I can see how having lower damage can make this mechanic a bit more daunting, as you'll lose more and more space and have to run from tighter and tighter AoEs, and it's just probably not the most fun thing to do. The other mechanic I have an issue with is his main spectacle mechanic. He gets on a flaming horse and runs around the arena, and that's it. When he gets on his horse, he'll knock down anyone around him and then start spawning a bunch of spiders. However, there's a friendly NPC in the room that puts up a dome. As long as you can even make it to the dome, this mechanic basically does nothing, as the spiders will walk into the dome, get frozen, and you can easily kill them as they walk in. Other than that, during the mechanic, the boss will drop flaming AoEs around the arena. The big problem with this is he typically just runs away from you and goes to the other side of the arena. He does seem to have a pattern he follows, but it's almost always on the opposite side of the arena, so there's really no threat from his flaming AoEs. There's really not much else to say about this fight. It's, in my opinion, far too easy. He doesn't put enough pressure on the group by doing enough damage to make anyone really scared. As long as you're capable of kiting in a straight line, this boss is pretty easy. On to the third boss, which is actually my favorite and probably the hardest boss in this entire dungeon. This boss kind of is insane. He has a lot of stuff going on and there's not much that teaches you. The ad pack before is supposed to, but again, my group sharing a singular brain cell kind of just did the ad pack and didn't figure it out. On our first run through with 3 people, we basically just RNG'd our way through the entire fight because we didn't have enough damage to burn the Atros fast enough for their orbs to matter, so I was able to just accidentally pick up all of them. However, with faster burns, you will have to coordinate who picks up what and when, as when the Atros die, they drop an orb, and if this orb is on the ground too long, it turns into a turret and does a lot of damage. I really quickly want to go over the negatives I have for this fight because I do generally like this fight, but I do have a couple of issues with it that I think a lot of players will struggle with. Overall, as long as the DPS and healers are either blocking or avoiding his big attacks, there's not a lot of damage that comes out. However, there is one instance in this fight where his damage ramps incredibly high for seemingly no reason. Personally, I do not mind this mechanic, as once you learn when it comes out, it's really not that bad to survive. You can just barrier it or shield through it. However, on the first playthrough, all of a sudden taking like 30k DPS out of seemingly nowhere is kind of annoying. I want to quickly talk about the RNG factor of this fight. The Atros spawn randomly throughout the fight, and since they drop orbs, it's very important that you pick them up as soon as they die. The problem with this comes when the Flame Atros spawn. The Frost and Shock Atros don't really have this problem because they're melee, and when you taunt them, they'll run at you. However, the Flame Atros are ranged and are unpullable. They can and will spawn in stupid stuff, forcing somebody to walk in a giant red circle they don't want to and pick up an orb. Tiny Telluria's arena is too small to actually outrange these, and if they spawn somewhere bad, there's basically nothing you can do, and you just have to pray there isn't an AoE sitting on top of the orb when it dies. While you could argue that you just shouldn't kill them while they're standing in stupid stuff, I'd also make the argument that they have so little health that if you're beaming in a certain direction, it just so happens to spawn there, you could theoretically instantly kill these off of their spawn. Along with this, it's super easy to lose these things in the clutter of the fight that's going on, especially when you're trying to focus on what the air Atronach is doing, because at the end of the day, these Atronachs don't do all that much. The giant boss in the middle does more damage than anything else in the arena, so there's really no point to pay attention to them. And this brings me on to the last thing that I want to complain about with this fight. The clutter in this fight can get ridiculous at points and downright annoying at others. For the most part, the clutter isn't that bad when he's phase transitioning or doing other things. Once he starts doing mechanics, there's so much crap on the ground that it sometimes is very hard to see where Atronachs are spawning, or even if one is spawned and hitting a DPS. Since the boss does the majority of the damage in the arena, it's really not that bad. However, losing an Atro in the middle of everything is super annoying as a tank, and if it kills someone, it just becomes even more annoying because it feels like it's just a bunch of stuff going on and there's nothing you can really control. Air Atronachs are notoriously bad for just hiding their mechanics behind other things. If we think of things like the Aegis from Unhallowed Grave, he can hide his heavy attack behind other mechanics. Squall, on the other hand, doesn't really do this. However, with the clutter of the fight, you have to watch what he's doing very closely because sometimes he will just kind of heavy you out of nowhere and behind a bunch of other stuff going on. I want to go over one of the positives I have because this fight goes back to the dungeons I personally enjoy more. Recently, a lot of the dungeons mechanics have been separated into phases or very much locked to one-off things. Squall kind of changes this. Squall kind of just throws everything at you and you just have to deal with it. If you can't, you can't. If you can, you can. I personally enjoy this style of fight. I know it's not for everyone, but I do like it. While the clutter can be kind of ridiculous, I am happy to see them going back to this style of fight, as Squall is just more fun. However, his execute doesn't last long enough. That would be my biggest change, is if they made his execute a little bit longer, because he has all of his mechanics at that point. He just doesn't have enough time to cast all of them. But yeah, it personally reminds me a lot of Corollary in a way. Corollary is far harder than this. However, the final Griffin is basically Yeah, you can kill the Griffin, but you just have to deal with the mechanics. There's nothing you can do about it, they just happen, and you just have to fight the boss while doing everything else. This fight gets back to that, and I really do like it. When I compared this in my head to other dungeons recently released, I wouldn't say it's the best thing they've ever done. However, I do think they have some interesting ideas. I do not like the second boss being a kind of copy of Chimera with slightly more mechs. It's just a little weird to me. The first boss is interesting enough to keep it fun, however, it's a little too easy. The final boss is very good, except it can be a little bit cluttered at times. I do like the final boss. I do think this dungeon overall is slightly too easy, and I think that comes from the first and second boss just being kind of ridiculous. I want to give them some props, in this case literally, for their secrets. The secrets have gotten a little bit better over time, however these are just funny. The buffs are interesting. The final buff you really can't make use of in Squall, though it might help. The second buff is terrible, but it's also funny, so who really cares at that point? The first buff is admittedly OP and probably shouldn't exist in the way it does. It makes the try extremely easy, but, you know, it is what it is. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I want to get one about Lep out. However, Lep I have some other opinions on, and they're a bit stronger than this one. Overall, I just think this one is too easy, but Lep I have some concerns about. But I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.